Not your typical neuroatypical experience. Changing portrayals of neuroatypical individuals in popular media by Safa Ahmed. Equal representation in media is essential. While there has been an uptick in media representation of people with autism spectrum disorders, ASD, in the last couple of decades, Hollywood often overcompensates its lack of diversity by depicting exaggerated and stereotypical characters. The issue with media representation of ASD is that the media has propagated wrong stereotypes by ASD for more than half a century. The autism spectrum is a broad one, and many people fall into the spectrum. Many people with ASD have experiences that are vastly different from others on the spectrum. Because of this, it is almost impossible for the media to represent ASD through movies or television perfectly, especially since it's impossible to understand what goes on in the minds of people with ASD, except by those who are actually diagnosed. However, the way the media portrays ASD is often completely wrong. The purpose of this research was to focus on the changing depictions of ASD in popular media throughout the decades to study how the changes have propagated different stereotypes. This is a summary of the harmful tropes over the decades. I'm going to be touching on each one in this presentation. What is ASD? ASD is characterized by three criteria. The first criterion is that the child displays deficits in social communication. These impairments make it difficult for people with autism to learn by observation. They also have mind blindness, an inability to realize that other people have their own unique points of view about the world. The second criterion includes restrictive repetitive patterns of behavior or interests. This can manifest in 4 different ways, though the child only has to display 2 of them. These include 1. Repetitive speech, motor movements, or use of objects. 2. Excessive adherence to routines and excessive resistance to change. 3. Highly restricted fixed interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. And 4. Hyper or hyperreactivity to sensory input, or unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. The third criterion is that these symptoms have to be present in early childhood. ASD is one of the fastest growing developmental disorders as of right now. The CDC estimates that every 1 in 68 children have ASD. It is important to understand that ASD is an umbrella term that now includes Asperger's, which is a social disorder. The main difference between the two is that children with Asperger's do not have speech delay. They often have good language skills, but they may not understand the subtleties of language, such as irony. They also don't have a clinically significant cognitive delay and may possess average to above average intelligence. The 1950s to 60s. In the 1940s, psychologist Leo Kanner came up with the term refrigerator mother. The purpose of this term is to describe the mother of children with autism. He believed that the children had autism because their mother was so cold and uncaring towards them. Kids with autism were seen as emotional, temperamental, and traumatized. It was thought that a loving adult could fix the condition. The kids in TV shows from the 50s and 60s were influenced by this, and as a result, the general public watching these movies and shows were given false information, resulting in the propagation of harmful stereotypes. The movie A Child is Waiting shows this. Judy Garland works as a therapist, and she eventually comes across 12-year-old Ruben, who has symptoms atypical of someone with ASD. She believes that he would be cured if he was able to live with married parents in a loving home. She basically believes that his symptoms were the result of his parents' divorce. In the 1980s, the most popular portrayal of people with autism is as magical savants, which started in the 1980s. These characters often have something close to supernatural abilities due to their diagnosis, which elevates the person from having a disorder that affects them negatively to having a disorder that actually makes them special and more interesting than the average person. Savant syndrome is sometimes mentioned, but is more often merely implied. This syndrome is a condition in which a person with less than average intelligence levels has certain abilities beyond what is normal for even a typical average intelligent person. While this is a real diagnosis, it's incredibly rare. Only about 10% of people with autism have it. Probably the most well-known character with autism is Dustin Hoffman's Raymond in Rain Man. According to psychiatrist Dr. Daryl Treffert, Rain Man was the best thing that ever happened to autism because of the sensational awareness that it brought to the national and international radar screen. In the movie, although Raymond has severe social and cognitive impairments, he exhibits savant characteristics as well. He has a photographic memory and is able to memorize most of a telephone book after reading it in the course of one night. He's also great with numbers and is able to use his skill to win upwards of $85,000 at a Las Vegas casino by counting cards. This movie had a lot of pros. In addition to winning 4 Oscars, it was also the U.S.'s highest-grossing movie of the year. According to the screenwriter Barry Morrow, after the movie was released, the floodgates opened in terms of medical research and funding. The rates of prevalence of ASD rose dramatically afterwards, and a 2019 study identified 1988 as a global change point year for autism. The movie's release and consequential success coincided with changes in diagnostic criteria and early infant screening. This movie was a game changer for people with autism. The movie, however, was heavily criticized by people with autism. Raymond fits the criteria for ASD and displays numerous characteristics of autism, but the added savant abilities just aren't realistic or an accurate portrayal of autism overall. The syndrome is already extremely uncommon, but people with skills like Raymond's are exceedingly rare. Rain Man gave rise to the idea that all autistic people are geniuses, or that they all have savant abilities, and this has become a common trope of autistic portrayals in film and TV. The 1990s. In the 1990s, there was an uptick in ASD representation in the media, and the stereotype of the autistic savant continued to be represented in movies and television shows, such as in Mercury Rising. Another trope was given rise to in this decade. Autism was made to be seen as a burden to the person diagnosed and to their family and community. In family pictures, the parents divorce after their child is diagnosed. In Cries from the Heart, the main character is sexually abused since he is unable to talk. And in David's Mother, the whole show revolves around a mother trying to figure out if she wants to institutionalize her teenage son who has autism. There's also a trend of characters having all the traits of ASD. There was also a trend of characters having all the traits of an ASD diagnosis, but not having it explicitly stated in the movie or television show. This can be seen in What's Eating Gilbert, Grape. This is one of the first, most accurate portrayals of ASD. Although the average person might easily confuse Arnie, the main character's symptoms, with a mental disability, Arnie meets all of the criteria for an autism diagnosis. He shows repetitive movements, self-injurious behaviors, and use of atypical speech. He has a childlike nature and mind blindness. Additionally, he has a lack of danger perception. He isn't able to carry on a conversation or fully take care of himself. For instance, he can't bathe himself. Not only does this movie portray autism accurately, but it is one of the only ones in which the person with autism is not portrayed as a savant, especially in this time period. This movie allows people to see a different side of autism as well. Instead of being quiet and reserved, Arnie is talkative, loud, and enthusiastic, and is often seen spending his time singing and laughing. Although Arnie has a great relationship with his 3 siblings and his mother, one of the most striking aspects of this film is how it highlights the struggles that the wider family experiences. Arnie's older brother Gilbert loves Arnie, but the stress of taking care of him makes Gilbert frustrated and angry, especially since his mom isn't able to help him as much because of her physical disability. Leonardo DiCaprio studied teenagers with ASD to prepare for his performance as Arnie, and it paid off. By utilizing those observations and incorporating tics and tendencies that are familiar to many families of children with ASD, DiCaprio was able to give a stunning and accurate performance of a person with ASD. In fact, when he showed up at the film's premiere, he shocked many people who thought he actually had autism. 2000s. In the early 2000s, there was a continuation of characters having an implicitly stated ASD diagnosis in television shows. Characters such as Dr. Temperance in Bones, Abed Nadir from Community, Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory, Reed from Criminal Minds, and Dr. Martin Ellingham from Doc Martin are all widely read as being on the autism spectrum, though their respective shows never specifically mention their diagnosis. As opposed to the early 2000s, though, in the late 2000s, more television shows moved towards characters having an explicitly stated diagnosis. Additionally, post-2000, there was still a plethora of highly skilled, high-functioning characters with ASD. For example, in television shows Touch, Alphas, Bones, The Big Bang Theory, Criminal Minds, and Sherlock. However, while the autistic savant trope is still immensely popular, there are many movies and shows that have moved away from the stereotype, especially movies that have been produced by smaller production companies, such as Snowcake, Adam, and Mary and Max, and Netflix original films and documentaries. The 2010s. Like some of the other shows mentioned earlier, The Good Doctor is one show that still follows the magical savant trope. In fact, though it debuted 30 years after Rain Man, the television show explicitly links Freddie Highmore's Dr. Sean Murphy with Dustin Hoffman's Rain Man character. In the pilot episode, Sean's mentor even states that Sean has genius-level skills in several areas. He has almost perfect recall, he has spatial intelligence, and he sees things and analyzes things in ways that are just remarkable, in ways we can't even begin to understand. Upon watching the trailer, critic Daniel Feinberg noted that he was wary, as we've had decades of eccentric, socially awkward procedural heroes whose place on the autistic spectrum was left unspoken, so this trailer feels both kind of progressive and really dated. It's progressive in that Sean's autism diagnosis is stated in the show, but dated in the trope of the magical savant has been overused, to state the least. While The Good Doctor is a positive portrayal, it's extremely idealistic. Sean is made to look superhuman, which is not true to life. However, the show does illustrate that not everyone with autism is the same, which was one of the major criticisms of Rain Man. Sean explicitly states that not every person with autism is the same, and in one episode, Sean treats a patient with autism. This patient does not have Savant syndrome and was overall a more realistic representation of the average person with autism. Created by Robia Rashid for Netflix, Atypical is one show in which the main character has ASD but not Savant syndrome. In addition to exploring how an ASD diagnosis can change family dynamics, the show also deals with Sam's transition into becoming a young adult, becoming one of the first shows to do so. This show accurately portrays Sam's desire to find both love and independence, and shows all the challenges that Sam has to overcome to find both. While Atypical has earned the praise of some who enthused that it was an accurate depiction, the response was not all positive at first. Season 1 was heavily criticized for relying too much on the tropes of the unfeeling autistic kid who was unable to form relationships. It was also criticized for failing to include enough actors in the cast and crew who were on the spectrum themselves, and because adults around Sam often failed to correct him when he did something inappropriate. However, seasons 2 and 3 have earned the praise of many critics, as all of these issues were fixed. A group of people with autism was introduced, all of who were able to show the complexities of the spectrum together. It is important to note that the show does not depict anyone with lower functioning autism, for example, someone who is nonverbal though. Moreover, producers of the show brought in David Finch, an author with autism who is both a husband and a father, to act as the show's consultant. Sam and his friends in the peer group are shown to have emotional maturity, and the complexities of their emotions are delved into. As a result of this, Atypical was able to debunk the myths that people on the spectrum don't feel emotions and that they don't have empathy. Overall, Atypical does a good job of not over-dramatizing his autism and of showing the less glamorous sides of ASD. The late 2010s and 2020s. During the last decade, television has been ushering in a new era for ASD representation. Shows like Parenthood and Sesame Street are giving viewers a more multifaceted look at ASD. Sesame Street introduced a new character, Julia, who has autism, in April 2015. Even so, documentaries have been the major reason behind better representation of ASD in the media. Each documentary that has been created about a person with ASD provides a glimpse into the lives of those affected by the disorder, which helps contribute to more awareness, understanding, and compassion. Documentaries show viewers an accurate portrayal of ASD, as to follow real people with real diagnoses who are able to speak for themselves, and the documentaries are able to show all the triumphs and struggles people with ASD face. Some of the documentaries include Autism in Love, Horseboy, Autism the Musical, and Love on the Spectrum. The biopic Temple Grandin has also made a lasting impact, which this biopic shows the inside minds and thoughts of Dr. Grandin, one of the most notable persons with autism. Overall, this research proves that autism representation in the media has changed over the decades, influencing the stereotypes of people with autism. Hollywood has been moving to the right track with more accurate portrayals, especially with the help of Netflix. It is important that they continue to do better so that the general public can become more educated about ASD, and because people with autism deserve accurate representation. Thank you.